And welcome everyone to Sports Spectrum's weekly Slant, the only faith and football show around. I am Jason Romano. We're so glad that you're tuning in tonight to our program, bringing Jesus into the football conversation. We got a great guest coming up, Molly McManimie, who has a very unique role in the world of pro football. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Molly in a second. First, I want to tell you about this 52-week devotional. We are now into December. If you're like me, you're probably panicking a little bit because we have to think about holiday gifts. What am I going to get my family? What am I going to get my friends? What am I going to get my wife for Christmas this year? I am not a good gift giver, but I am good at telling you about this gift, which is a 52-week devotional, which you need to go check out. It's the perfect stocking stuffer or the perfect gift for the sports loving, Jesus loving person in your family. If you have a child that you're looking to grow deeper with, that loves sports, and you want to maybe go through a devotional with them, this is the devotional to get. 52 weeks, 52 stories from the world of professional sports, growing in your faith. Get the Sports Spectrum Increase 52-week devotional available now. You can get it at theincrease.com. That's the best place to go to, theincrease.com. Or, of course, you can get it on Amazon, where everybody's buying books. But it's the Sports Spectrum Increase 52-week devotional. Get your copy today. Don't wait, and order it now so you get it in time for Christmas, the 52-week devotional. Now, our guest today, Molly McManimie. She is an NFL player agent. Such a unique role, not only as a player agent in the NFL, but as a female in the NFL as a player agent. She is the vice president of client services with Carrick Sports Management out in Las Vegas, Nevada. We actually had her on our Sports Spectrum podcast about a year ago, but I thought for this show, Molly's the perfect person to bring on and kind of have her share what it's like right now to be an NFL player agent, how God is working in her life, and God is working quite a bit in Molly's life. And then where does she see herself going? What does it mean to serve others? Molly's got a great story. She loves Jesus, and she's going to join us right now on Sports Spectrum's weekly slant. Molly McManimie, let's take a watch. Molly McManimie, it's so good to have you here on Sports Spectrum's weekly slant. How are you?
I'm doing great. How have you been?
I've been great. We last spoke to you on our Sports Spectrum podcast, but we thought with this new show, this faith and football streaming show that we have, you being the first female guest that we've had on as well, but it would be unique to kind of have you kind of explain your story and your journey, the role that you have in the world of football, which I think is an important one and a very unique one. You're a NFL player agent. We're now into December, which is kind of crazy. And I'm just curious for you, when we had you on, I think it was right before the season started in 2020, which was crazy in its own right. But now we're kind of in December. What does life look like this time of year for you as a player agent? What's kind of the thinking? What's on your mind? I'm guessing a couple things, but what's kind of the role and what's a day-to-day look like for you right now?
Yeah, so I can kind of back up to your first question. I'm an NFL player agent, like you said. So my role is to represent the players that are in the NFL. And that's everything from negotiating their contract, which is what most people think of when they think of an agent. But that's truly the smallest part of our job. If you're lucky, you do two or three for a guy. And even if you do that many, they're very short periods of time. So day to day, I'm just here to service the client. So that can be anything from helping them set up travel for a trip they're on, helping them manage an injury when they get hurt. It can also be, corresponding with the team to figure out why they're not getting as much playing time as they want, and just generally helping, make their life easier off the field so that they can take care of business on the field. And so I got into this business about 6.5 years ago. I've been an agent for about 4.5. And I think one of the things that maybe you saw on Twitter recently that maybe inspired you to ask me to be on was I recently was thinking about my journey. And when I started in this business, it was because I loved football.
Mm.
And what I actually have noticed is I'm in the business of people, not football. And football is just kind of the tool that is used to bring me into these young men's life. And so I believe that God made me love football so much so that I would pursue this, but ultimately my purpose is so much bigger, and it really is that day-to-day relationship that I get to have with these guys, and you get to know them on such a human level, and you get to know their stories. And so they're athletes by trade, but really they become, like my brothers. And so that it's a really privileged position to be in when a guy comes to you and says, I want you to help me navigate my professional football career. And when you know the statistics of how hard it is to get there, you have to take that responsibility so seriously, because the joke is the NFL stands for not for long. And it's just so true. Even guys who, come in top of the world, when they get to the league, every day you have to earn your keep in this league. And it's a, what have you done for me lately league. So being in a position to help them navigate this crazy business is, like I said, an honor. And I've found over these 6 years that it has really nothing to do with football, and it really has everything to do with relationship. So to your second question, right now is an insane time of year for us. So our current clients are in the tail ends of their season. So you're starting to see how the playoffs and stuff are going to shape out. So for some guys, you're already helping them, navigate what their off season is going to look like. For guys who are in a contract year, you're talking to teams about extensions. You're figuring out, do they want to keep them? Are they going to be a free agent in a few months or in a couple months? And then on top of that, we're also recruiting and shaping out our draft class for 2022. So we are taking a lot of final meetings right now with guys that we've been recruiting over the last year or so. That means traveling to their families, traveling to them, maybe attending their last game, and starting to arrange these things for guys that we think are going to sign with us, and we will be their representation. So that's a lot of just looking forward and looking ahead. A lot of rejection this time of year. So I get a lot of, you're great, but you're not going to be my agent phone calls. Well, like I said, if you're lucky, it's a phone call. Most of the time it's a text. So it's a tough time of year because it's the holidays. So you have a lot of personal stuff going on, but you have to take care of your clients. You cannot, just drop the ball because you have your own stuff and you have recruiting. They have to stay, the top of the priority list. But then on top of it, you have all that kind of intermingled. So it's a very, very busy time of year.
There's a lot
Yeah.
there. How do you handle the no's, right? Because I think a lot of people are even afraid to go into something because there might be a lot of no's in this business. There's a lot of no's, but there's a lot of yeses too. But this time of year, when you're talking to a potential client and you get that text, hopefully a call, but that text that says, I'm going in a different direction, is that something you just have to be able to kind of, like a loss in the NFL for a player? You just got to kind of put it behind you and push forward? Or is there a moment of mourning and maybe taking it a little personally that you have to kind of walk through?
Yeah, so it was funny last year, and this is one of the things that I've, talked to you about how I feel like I've grown even more in my faith through this business since the
Yeah.
last time that I got to chat with you. And last year I had a situation where there was a player that had basically told me he was going to go with me pretty early on, and that normally doesn't happen because they're technically not supposed to. So he didn't say it because we didn't want to break any rules, but it was kind of like, okay, like we're comfortable with you, we're going to move, I had a good feeling about it. And I got told no it was around this time of year. It was about like December 10th or so. And
Mm,
I bawled my eyes out. And I was like, luckily, by the grace of God, I was at my parents' house actually.
yeah.
And I don't live by my parents. So it was really nice happenstance. And I got to be just like, a 12-year-old kid again. My mom just like hugged me and made me food.
Yeah.
But I was, texting my dad at the same time, and I kind of told him how it happened. And I was like, I've never felt this sad about a no before. And he's like, my sister's an actress, so she gets told no even more than I do. And he's like, you need to learn from your sister and get used to rejection. And I was like, you know what? No. I was like, I actually don't want to become numb to it, because the level that I care is why it makes it so sad. But that's also why I'm so good at my job. So I
Mm,
never want to remove that emotional human aspect from the way I operate to the point where I'm not disappointed, because then it just becomes a business and then they're just commodities. And I love the relationship aspect, like I said, of even the recruiting process. You get to know them so well and their families, and you almost feel like they're your client. And so when that happened, I had a moment of like, how am I going to balance these two things where I don't want to stop caring? Because again, I think that's my superpower. And I also, though, don't want, like you said, to let it linger too long to where you're not moving forward and putting it behind you. So I have like about a 12 to 24-hour rule where if, they tell me, like, I got told no yesterday and I said, you have the rest of the day to be upset about it. And then you wake up tomorrow and you move forward. And the powerful impact of faith in a career like this, where it is a lot of no, it's just knowing whatever is for you is going to be for you. And one of my girlfriends posted something recently about how it's silly of us to think that we could do anything to really change, what God has for us. Like we're not that powerful. So when you think about what should I have done differently, I think that's important to get better. But you also have to remember this would have worked out if it was meant for me. And there's so many situations now that I've been in that, because I've done this a few times now. I've gone through the whole cycle that I've gotten told no. I thought this person was the perfect client for me. And then 6 months later, something happens. I'm like, oh no, we would not have jived after all. Yeah. So it always ends up making sense, but I do allow myself that little mourning period, like you said, because I want it to matter. I want it to feel sad because I want to know that I put everything into it. And that's just a natural result of putting your all into something.
Yeah. It shows you care about your work. Cause if you're just kind of like, oh, no big deal. It's same with an NFL player, right? I mean, they should be upset if they lose a big game. And it's not everything, but you put so much work into each game every week. You put so much work, Molly, into your job that it should sting a little bit. And
exactly.
You should care about your role. You mentioned your faith quite a bit. I don't want you to have to tell the whole story again, but I would love to hear kind of the importance of Christ in your life and maybe the Cliff Notes version for a show like this of coming to Christ. I know it was more recent for you in terms of the surrendering to Jesus. Can you kind of share that a little bit?
Yeah. So the Cliff Notes abridged version is I did grow up in the church. I went to church every Wednesday and Sunday growing up. I was always in Sunday school and also in some sort of activity that kept me in church, like brought me to church midweek. And I'm thankful for that because I always believed in God. But I actually just said this in my Bible study group last week. I realized recently that I was a believer for a long time, but I was not a follower. And so it wasn't until November of 2019, I went through a program at my church, a discipleship program. I had the opportunity to get baptized, and I was baptized as a baby. So I always felt it was inappropriate and maybe a little bit self-centered to want to do it again. Like, oh, look at me, I'm getting baptized. But I kept having this tug at my heart in church when I would see adults do it. And I was like, I never got to actually declare my beliefs. I had a confirmation of sorts. I was Lutheran, but it still didn't feel like what I thought baptism should be. And that's really what baptism is a declaration. Yeah. So it came about perfectly. I had the opportunity to do it at the celebration for the end of that program I went through. And it was perfect because I didn't invite family. There was no brunch. It was just like me, Jesus, and a few of my group members. And it was exactly how I think it was supposed to be. And so in November 2019, almost exactly 2 years ago, I actually, like I always call it, like I went all in. I actually surrendered. I learned through that program what it means to walk with Christ in your everyday life. And that's when I think I became a follower of Christ versus just a believer in God. And so to me, that was a big switch because it meant I have to do things God's way now, not my way. And that required a lot of letting go of my ego.
Sure.
Which, we say surrender. And when you think of surrender, you think of sacrifice and you think of losing things and a lack of. And for me, it's been the opposite. It's like all of a sudden my life became more abundant and more peaceful. And I had all these things increase in my life when you think of decrease, when you think of surrender. And so it truly, like, it was the best decision I ever made. I know that's cliche, but it then started to impact my career because I was able to be okay with these losses that we were just talking about, knowing that God put me in this industry for certain people. And that means certain people are going to tell me no. And I need to be available for the people he wants me to represent. So I may never represent a first round pick, but that's okay because I am not in this for the lists or the statistics or the headlines that would equate to worldly success, because I chased after that for a few years and it was empty. It was
Mm,
not fulfilling. And when I got baptized, everything started to fall into place, and that's when my career again ironically became more abundant, because I was doing things in line with my purpose rather than my ego. And I learned early on, like, your ego is never satisfied. So you'll just always be chasing and chasing. And so now I've kind of found my lane, my place in this business. And it helps me part with the things that aren't for me so much easier, because I'm then, available and more capable to help the people that I'm meant for.
yeah, that's really awesome and well said. And it reminds me of a Bible verse. I think it's he who exalts himself will be humbled. He who humbles himself will be exalted.
Hmm.
And it reminds me of staying humble, because when our ego gets in the way, I think it was Daryl Strawberry that told me ego can stand for easing God out. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, that's good. That's really good, because it makes sense. Our ego gets in the way, and it becomes about us, and God is kind of put on to the side. And yeah, that's a really great way to put it. Now, you told me when we first started talking, and you alluded to it a little bit, I think, in our discussion, that you really transformed over the past year. Now, we had you on our Sports Spectrum podcast back in, I think it was September, early October of 2020. Here we are. It's December now of 2021. What has taken place over this past year in terms of how you've grown? And you use the word transformed. What's kind of happening right now in the life of Molly McManimie that God's working and God's doing?
Well, I think a big thing is, I feel like there's every time you dive deeper into your relationship with God, you have this moment of like, why didn't I do this sooner? And
Yeah,
you feel like this is the best it can be, and then you dive even deeper, and there's just never an ending to it. And that's what's so beautiful to me is there's always more to learn, there's always more to give, there's always more to surrender. And so every time I've surrendered one part of my life, I've realized there's other parts of my life that I haven't. And then I, have those conversations with God, and I have those moments of transformation, like you say, where I'm like, if I gave this area of my life to God and this is how good it is, why wouldn't I give this area to my life? And
yeah,
so, from a business and personal standpoint, there's just been a lot more intentional, daily and like big moments of surrender where I'm more at ease with that part of my relationship with God. But I noticed even through, my journey, I did humble myself in a way, but I found myself still like feeling like I had to prove something because I'm a woman. And so it's really easy to all of a sudden realize all my rhetoric and how I talk about my job is still about me,
mm,
because you're trying so hard to prove to people that you belong. And that is a big aspect, I think, too, of becoming a follower of Christ, is giving up the desire to prove to people that you're this or you're that. And that
yeah,
is like a lot with social media. Social media is just a big pool of people trying to prove to each other things. And so I
yeah.
realized, like, even though I had humbled myself in a big way, I still hadn't humbled myself enough to the point where this is about service. And so I have to stop like using the I sentences, and I have to start making this about my clients and making this about what they're doing, and ultimately then it's what God is doing, with us both together and separately. And so it's just it was like an even deeper version of what I went through initially when I surrendered my whole life to God. I've just realized these little pockets that I still had work to do in, and it's just becoming more and more natural to do things in the way that God has instructed me to, rather than still feeling that pull of your, because the ego still tries to creep up.
Yes, it
and
does.
and the devil is tricky. He'll trick you into thinking like you're doing something for God, but it still comes across, and there's still that selfish kind of motivation. And so it's just a lot more intentional. Like, I think that's like the best word for it, is I've just been so much more intentional with so many aspects of my life and my business to make sure that I'm not fooling myself into thinking I'm doing something for good, when really it's still, kind of that voice in the back of your head. Like, you need to prove to people that you're doing a good job, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
No, it does. And you said something really that helped me a lot too. When I started saying we instead of I, it changed everything because suddenly it's not about me anymore. I
Hmm.
might be in the we part, but it really becomes about the team that I work for, the team that I work with, the team that I'm serving. And it's really made a big difference in my life and just reminding myself that it's not about me. It's about the team that I work for, the team that I serve. It's not about Molly. It's about the team that she works for, the players that she serves. And it just takes ourselves out of the equation by using we versus I. And I thought, man, that's such a big thing for me to be able to serve others that way. Now, I was looking on social, you mentioned social media and the cesspool that it can be, but there was also something really cool that you tweeted recently that I want to just read and kind of have you react to. It says, I want you to know I'm imperfect and God still loves me. You don't have to wait till you feel perfect or worthy to follow Christ. He wants you to come exactly as you are. We are all broken. That's the gospel in a nutshell in many ways. But why that tweet? Why did you feel, kind of compelled to share that?
Honestly, it was kind of one of those moments, those God moments, we talk about, because we had my Bible study group had just had a really long discussion about social media, and this this kind of we have this paradox almost of, when we say we're a Christian, there's this group of people who thinks that we have to do everything perfect or they're going to call us out. And so you almost get scared to post certain things, because if you post worship music and Bible verses, then people put you in this box of, okay, they don't do anything wrong, and when they do, I'm going to call them out on it.
Yeah.
But then you're also in that, there's this other side you can go on, where if you don't post enough, or if you don't share the word of God on your social media, you feel like you're almost doing the world a disservice. Because we talked about this idea of, if we have 5,000 followers and 499 of them think that 4,999 of them
Yeah.
think you're annoying or think you're preachy, but one person is impacted by it enough to dive a little deeper, to look it up, then it's worth it. Like, who cares about those other people? And so when I saw that tweet, I think it was from an NFL player
Yeah.
who I
Antonio Hamilton, I think is
yeah,
who
who
tweeted.
who I don't represent. I don't know him, but it
Yeah.
it really, like, struck me, and I just felt I needed to add to it, because I had just had this long discussion, and it felt like God was, like, kind of handing me an opportunity to share that message that I had just discussed with my group. And I had posted something on my Instagram very similar, I don't know, maybe a year ago, where I
Mm.
had this moment where I realized, for so long, the reason I didn't do that baptism that I talked about was I was worried about that surrender aspect, because I was worried that I was not ready, that I was not good enough, that I had not fixed my life in certain areas. And it's the complete opposite. Like, that's not the order it goes in. You don't become perfect and then you find Christ. You find Christ and then he makes you whole in him. And so when you realize that shift, it is, like you said, it is the gospel. It is the thing that you're trying to get people to grasp and to really, like, digest. And so when I saw an opportunity to share that, I had to do it. And I probably wouldn't have tweeted that 2 years ago. And we also
Mm.
had a discussion about how a lot of times, for some reason, Christians, when we're having talks with people who are maybe not believers, we shy away from using the word Jesus. And we're more comfortable with using the word God, but for some reason, using the word Jesus sounds more Bible-y to people and more preachy.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to be more intentional with using Christ, using Jesus when I talk, and not just making it about this, God who's somewhere, off in the distance. Like, Jesus is very tangible, and he's the one that you're supposed to relate to. He's the human, embodiment of God. And so it was
Mm.
a bunch of discussions that I've had, and I'm trying to not be someone who has these discussions, has these great moments with my group or in church, and then I don't practice it. And it's uncomfortable. Like, sometimes you press send on those tweets and you're like, did I maybe just lose a recruit because I'm
Mm.
too Jesus-y? Did I maybe
Yeah.
just turn someone off and they're going to unfollow me? But going back to the first thing I said, I have to remember that there might be one person. And I've had people who say, because you post Maverick City music, I listen to worship music now. If
Yeah.
that's the only thing they do that day that connects them to God, that's fine with me. It's better than nothing, and it makes God more accessible. So
Yeah.
that was just a timing thing where it was one of those like smack you in the face. I just talked about this. This is my opportunity to practice what I preach. And I'm happy I did it, because if someone read it and said, okay, that's how it works, great, I'm going to go to church, then I did my
Yeah.
job.
I think you actually introduced me to Maverick City as well,
Oh, I'm
maybe a year or
honored.
so ago. Yeah, and that was awesome because I listen to them, I think, every morning now,
Yeah.
to get my mind right before I start the day. You mentioned Instagram in a post. You also posted back in August that you celebrated a pretty important birthday, the big 3-0.
Oh, yep. Yep.
So here's a fill in the blank question for you, Molly. My 30s are going to be what? My 30s are going to be
I would say authentic, because I think as you get older, you get more comfortable with who you are and you care less about the other things. And I think that's one of the beauties of age, that you can't really articulate to people who are younger than you. They just have to live it. But
yes.
it is one of the biggest privileges of aging, is just getting to the point where you don't give a crap. You're and you just want to live the life that makes you happy and works for you. And so I hope that my 30s are just me being me and not feeling like I have to prove or do anything for others.
Well, this has been a very authentic conversation. Hopefully, your 30s are even better than your 20s. And for me, I'm talking about 50 soon, and I'm like, I hope my 50s are even better than
I'm
my
sure they
40s.
will be.
So
I've heard it just keeps getting better. That's
I
what
hope
I've
so.
heard.
Yeah, my 40s were great, and I got
Yeah.
2 more years left, and they were fantastic. Last question: how can we be praying for you? This sounds like a crazy season of life. How can those watching? How can us at Sports Spectrum be praying for Molly McManimie?
I think just praying that I continue to be aligned with the people and the projects that are meant for me, and to continue to lessen the ego and increase the Jesus.
That's John 3:30. He must
Yeah.
increase, we must decrease. That's
Yep.
good. Molly, this is great. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks for coming on Sports Spectrum's Weekly Slant, and all the best to you. And hopefully we'll have you back on again and hear all the great things God has been doing in your life. But thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And super thankful to Molly McManimie, NFL player agent, for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum's Weekly Slant. I loved her heart for God. I loved her boldness in sharing her faith, and I loved how vulnerable she was and willing to share how maybe that faith wasn't always where it needed to be. She went from trusting in Jesus to becoming a follower of Christ. And there's a big difference, as she described earlier on the show. And so we just appreciate Molly for joining us here today. You can follow her on Instagram. You can keep tabs on her and how she's doing. Follow her on Twitter as well. I love that tweet that we read that she shared. So she's not shy about sharing her faith. And that's an important thing, I think, for all of us as followers of Christ. With any platform that we might have, I think we have a responsibility to at least let people know that there is a God in heaven that loves them, and there is a Savior named Jesus who wants them to have a relationship with him and provide what I like to call access to God and an opportunity to say yes and enter into the kingdom. And that's the most precious gift that any of us could ever have. And it may be the most important decision that any of us could ever make. And so I appreciate Molly for sharing so openly about her journey with God here on the Weekly Slant. Before we say goodbye, I want to remind you again about our 52-week devotional, The Increase 52-week devotional, these stories stemming from Sports Spectrum Conversations, the perfect holiday gift. You need to go check it out. It's on Amazon, or order it. The best place, really, if you're looking for a book like this and more resources, is to go to theincrease.com. We have a store now there where you can buy a bunch of different things, not just the devotional. You can get sweatshirts and hats and even mugs like this. You can get Yetis there. Go check it out at theincrease.com. But make sure you get this 52-week devotional. It is the perfect holiday gift. Again, at theincrease.com. Thanks for tuning in. I can't wait for next week's show. We'll see you then. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, and thank you for joining us here on Sports Spectrum's Weekly Slant.